We will go ahead and get started. It is 4:31 and today is Monday, August 7th, 2023. And welcome to our JFAC committee meeting. My name is Jennifer Crossley and I am chairing yet again, so you get to hear my voice again. So sorry for your loss or whatever you think. So we will go ahead and get started. I will look at my fellow committee members, council members Wilt and Iverson, to take a look at the agenda and see if there's any additions that need to be made or any revisions.
Councilmember Crossley, item number 6, I believe we do have presentations today. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that presentation, I know it says TBD. We had a cancellation at the last minute. So we have Guy Loffman from the NAACP here today, and he will give a brief overview of what the NAACP and their findings are in the justice system here in Monroe County. So looking forward to that presentation. All right. Other than that, I'm looking to see if somebody would like to make a motion to adopt today's agenda.
So moved.
Okay. All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. Next, we will go ahead. Our agenda says to recap discussion of Intercept 1. And I am going to see if I can share my screen here so we can make sure people at home would be able to see. Okay, so as we are looking here, last week again was our Intercept 0, which was diversion. And I thought that was a really good conversation because we heard 2 presentations last week from Marilyn Grimes from Courage to Change, Sober Living, and Linda Grove Paul, who is head of Centerstone and Stride. And both of them gave good presentations about their organizations. And we had a discussion of some of the things that we can do here in the county. And so to kind of briefly go over this, we obviously heard from all of the presentations, but in particular, to focus on what we heard last week, we have a severe need for funding of housing. And both parties talked about supportive housing, recovery housing, and sober living. And so with Courage to Change, they wanted to have a little bit more funding to have a residence that would alleviate rent cost as well. And then I know Marilyn had talked a lot about MAT, and so I'm glad we have that up here because that means medically assisted treatment, housing that requires separate housing with, have something blocking, separate housing with increased oversight. And so again, another thing that we had briefed on was building partnerships in the community. It was very important for us to talk about IU Health, employers, and the city of Bloomington as well, because we know that we are not alone in any of the work that we are doing here in the county, but we do think that more people need to come to the table to help, because again, as we have mentioned, it's not just Monroe County, it's not just city of Bloomington issues, it is all of us that are needing to come to the table to figure all of this out and bring in experts that would be able to help. Engage in formal mapping of process sequential intercept model through the National Alliance of Mental Health Illness, which is also known as NAMI, and then funding of transitional mental health and crisis services. I know it was talked about with the mobile crisis unit that just got started, and Linda Grove Paul was able to explain that just a little bit, but I recommend doing that research as well for anybody that's not really sure, because that's definitely important as well. And then obviously, how are we going to fund all of these things that we all have these great ideas about? And so it's been discussed that we do have county ARPA funds that could go towards some of this. We know that all of that cannot go to the need of it, but that could be a start And then the opioid settlement funds, both county and city alike have those types of funds. And so what could we do to bring those things together to help with funding of some of the items that we mentioned above? And then again, as you can see on your agenda here, and for those following at home, you can always go to our website here and see the reading list that we had. But a lot of this information came from the Eve Hill and the Ken Ray study that was done a few years back. So with that being said, I'm gonna stop my share here. Does any of my committee members have anything to add to our recap here?
The only thing that I would add is that the point on the National Association of Mental Illness, NAMI, training is, it could be led by one of our very own Monroe County Women's Commission members, Dr. Kathleen Sobiek. So I thought that was a really neat thing that happened at the last meeting.
That's good.
Good local resource.
Okay, thank you. And then I would like to add, as we are all very thankful, I'm definitely want to just continue to give a shout out to our community members and our public comment that come in for giving us food for thought. I know the Monroe County Women's Commission had some things that they wanted to bring up as well, and I'm sure after hearing our DEI conversation that they might come back to the table. But again, just giving us more food for thought as we are going through with all of these things here. All right. I thought I saw a hand up, but I didn't see it. Okay. All right, so the next thing that we will have is a recap of our off-meeting week. I know that Councilor Wiltz had a Board of Judges meeting, so she will go ahead and present her findings.
Findings sound so official. When I look at my notes, I'm not sure they rise to that occasion, but Councilor Deckard and I did visit with the Board of Judges last Wednesday, I believe it was, and it was great. They had a lot to say, and I think that we will need to be talking with them some more in the future. They expressed, it's a body of people. So when I say they, there may or may not be complete consensus, but in general, we talked a lot about co-location of justice services, including civil and criminal courts, the jail, and court administration, and the concerns they had around security in transportation if co-location wasn't an option, and some other logistical things specifically about space within a facility. They'd love it to be right down next to all of our downtown services on multiple bus lines if possible, and the courtroom sizes themselves, as well as other rooms in the current Justice Building, are very small. So they had a lot of capacity concerns with respect to the number of people they're trying to put into spaces, literally during hearings, and a lot of the problems that can come up when you're trying to keep folks segregated to follow the proper procedures. So they talked a lot, like I said, about space needs and that type of stuff. In terms of actually programming, we talked a lot about the pretrial release programs and the need for folks to be able to get to and from the public defender and then the community corrections. So they need that proximity. It kind of all came back to, we can do these programs a lot more easily if we've got the right setup from an architectural or layout sense. Another thing that they talked about was they wanted to address the criticism, I guess, that they've received on continuances and the role that continuances sometimes play in the judicial process, sometimes, especially when you do have pretrial release, and you're hoping that someone is able to make progress toward goals before the final trial in their case, you want to give them time. And occasionally there could be a continuance that's actually very, very beneficial and wanted by a defendant. Of course, that's not necessarily everything. But that was one of the things they talked a lot about, was often they're checking in, they're scheduling hearings knowing that they might not be ready to finish the proceedings. I don't have the right vocabulary for this, so I'm struggling. But to finish the court case, but they want to see the person and they want to get eyes on them and they want to check on their progress. And so they use that continuance, schedule a hearing and then continue it to provide that opportunity. We had an hour. So, and there were a lot of folks in the room. So I would really like to look at how that works, how that maybe could be still made more efficient or done differently, or if that's really the best way to go about it. But I found it very interesting. And of course, it did come up too that a lot of continuances occur because we have only one evidentiary lab certified in the state. And so lab results take way too long. And that's something that hopefully will be changing in the future. But right now, that is another reason that things get pushed. I talked a little bit about the idea of telecourt and the doing hearings by Zoom, and civil courts are doing initial hearings by Zoom. And with other court hearings, particularly with testimony, they need to show the need for it. And criminal courts, of course, have a little bit harder time and have a lot more restrictions. So they are looking at what they can do. Several folks expressed the need to be in a room with someone and have that interpersonal kind of insight that comes from being in the same space with the defendant. But there are also some risks associated with having Zoom hearings with respect to when things might become testimony. And then you have a lot of rules around testimony with which I'm not familiar, but I trust that they are and took their word for it. The only other thing I have down too is that when we talk about treatment, they were very interested in having us be more specific, because I think as we've been learning through these meetings and over the past couple of years, not all treatment's the same. Not all treatment is intended to do the same thing. So when they want something that is a more remand someone to treatment option, that's not necessarily going to be fulfilled by a community-based home. And so they want us to start speaking more specifically. They didn't have specific recommendations or advice. I think that's a conversation that we will continue, but they did want us to be careful not to lump all treatment into one category when we're talking about providing treatment. They did mention, with respect to treatment, sorry, checking my notes real quick, that often the programs that take place inside the jail can be very difficult because someone could be released before the program is completed. And so that makes for some cases where people are just then left without the end goal having been reached and not necessarily having the supports outside of the jail that they would need to finish the program or attain the goals that associated with that. So there were definitely some good topics, and I learned a lot about how they move people around in that space and how they can't move people around in that space very easily. So Overall, it was really good and a conversation that I think both Councilor Deckard and I would like to continue.
All right, well, thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions for Kate?
That I may or may not be able to answer.
100%.
So the Board of Judges obviously cannot be at these meetings. So when you say that you and Councilor Deckard want to continue the conversation, is that more of these types of, you two will be the representatives of the body going to the Board of Judges meeting and talking about these issues and asking more questions? Is that the way it's going to work?
Not necessarily. Actually, the first thing that came up was the fact that they would be willing to present to this committee. They see that presenting to this committee, whether it's as the Board of Judges or Community Corrections, they'd be happy to do that. But they want it to be very specific. So we're coming to present on this topic in an informative manner, and the reason that they aren't here every week is because participating on a body that makes fiscal recommendations would be inappropriate to their positions, but they could certainly be invited to come and speak to us on specific things. So we could do that, and I think that would be great. I'd also be willing to, be the liaison again and go visit them, because that was really interesting.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you listed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 or 8 topics. Did you talk about the fiscal side of those things? Was part of this conversation a fiscal conversation, or was it simply a needs assessment?
I would say it functioned much more like a needs assessment, simply because of the judicial need to not be involved in fiscal matters, and that was their preference. So I think they're leaving it to us to determine where the fiscal side of things. I will say that some of the things that they talked about could very easily translate into efficiencies that have fiscal implications, but that was not the focus of our conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering if the Board of Judges, maybe in consultation with prosecutor's office and public defender's office, are working on some of the recommendations in the Bray JCI report from 2021 that had to do with the judges and those processes. Is that a different committee that's ongoing? Do you know?
I don't know if they're working directly on that. I mean, I didn't ask.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Seeing there are none. Thank you so much for that. And we will go ahead and move forward with our conversation that we are having today. Again, every week, for those that are just watching this for the first time, or if you've been following, we just want to reiterate, every week we are following this, the intercepts. And so last week again was intercept 0, but this week we're taking a little bit of a different approach. And so we are going to be talking about DEI, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how can our county council, or how can the county rather, make investments to make sure that we are promoting the equality in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender within the justice system. So before we get to our presentation that we will have for today, I thought it was really important for us for me to share this graphic that I keep seeing, and some of you probably have seen this too, so that we can get a standpoint of what that all looks like when we all talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm sure you have seen all of this. And so again, for those who haven't, this is a symbolism of what all of this looks like and what this means. And so the fence here that you can see where the 3 people are, that is supposed to be a symbol of an obstacle. And every day in our system here in our county, we know that we have many different obstacles, as we've discussed in previous weeks. And so imagine these three people are people of our community, but this is a symbolic obstacle of the justice system or jail, mental health, all of those things blocked into that. What it means for equality and equity, and I think sometimes people kind of blend the two together, and there's a slight difference between that. But as you see in the first one, for equality, each individual or group of people are given the same resources and opportunities. Do we have that here in the county? No. But how do we get to this point? In terms of equity, each person has a different circumstance and allocated the resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. And as you can see from the various people that you see here, they're all different origins of height. And so that also is presenting the barrier here. And then lastly, justice, recognition that everyone deserves equal access and opportunities as such there exists, a dedication to creating and sustaining a society or a system where true fairness exists. And we know that that is something that we are really trying to go for here. And so I thought it was really important for us to have that conversation and start off with that visual here. So next up, I'm gonna call Guy Loftman to our table here to join us. And he is of legal redress of the Monroe County chapter of the NAACP. And I've known him for a while. And he's gonna give a brief history and an overview of the Monroe County jail findings that they have done. And so we welcome Guy to the table here.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. You have 15 minutes for your presentation. So we
Okay,
can
thank
give
you.
Lots of room for questions.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and let me know how I'm doing on timing.
Okay. And let me know also too, I believe it's also on our agenda online as well for those that want to follow, and we will make sure to, for our committee website, what he is discussing will be also presented online too. So just let me know when you need me to share any type of screen here.
Okay, and I think you've got the one document that I circulated available.
The newest one.
to,
Yes.
To get put on screen when the time comes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been with the NAACP for over 25 years, and the first meeting I went to, one of the first meetings I went to, Clarence Gilliam, who was the president and fabled in the community, asked me, Guy, why is it blacks spend so much more time in jail than whites for the same crime? And I said, that shouldn't be hard to figure out. It was the most naive thing I've ever said. 25 years later, I'm still trying to figure out, number one, is it true? And to the extent it is true, why is this happening? In 2003, 20 years ago, we published a very detailed, comprehensive study of race and justice in Monroe County. It was supported by the NAACP, by the Unitarian Universalist Church, we included the circuit court judge, Michael Hoff, IU professors, and especially Carl Salzman, who was the prosecutor at the time. And getting data is very hard in anything like this. And Carl opened his office to us every Saturday morning. He came down and made all of his files available. We went through the files one at a time through the analysis we were making. He was right there with us. And if anything came up, we couldn't interpret something, Carl would help us. And he entered data. And the work project we came up with was recognized by the American Bar Association as an outstanding example of community cooperation. And nothing has ever topped it in terms of comprehensiveness. of analysis in Monroe County, and it's rarely seen anyplace. And the I'm gonna, spoiler alert. What I'm going to end with is that things haven't changed very much in the intervening 25 years. What we found was that blacks were 9.5% of all the bookings during this period we were studying of 2000. Whereas the black people were about 4% of 3.5 to 4% of Monroe County's population. So they were overrepresented by about 300%. Blacks were in the jail way more than you would expect if it was a system that didn't have disparate racial impact. At that time particularly, and to this day, racial profiling is, well, that must be racial profiling. And one of the things we could find out because of the way we did this, we asked, one of the questions we could see in these police reports was, why was this person arrested? Was it officer initiated? Or was it a citizen's complaint that came in that they were investigating? Or was it something else? And what we found was that the officer-initiated stops were not predominantly against black people. The officer-initiated stops were predominantly against white people. Well, the obvious answer to that, when you think about it, is because where would I go if I wanted to meet, I know there is no quota, but if I wanted to meet an imaginary quota of how many people would I arrest in Monroe County, I would go down on Kirkwood Avenue and haul off a bunch of white college students. And in fact, that was happening. That was a part of it. But even when we took out alcohol arrests, we did not see a disproportionate arrest by Bloomington police officers or Monroe County police officers, any of the entities involved. What we did see was a tremendous disproportionality in people coming in for failure to appear in court and for violation of probation. In other words, most people were coming into jail not because they committed new crimes, but because they couldn't get along with the criminal justice system itself. And so that's, to me, a very important thing to keep in mind, is that it's the people who are coming into the system are often, who are coming into the jail, are often there because they have failed the system or the system has failed them. And it bears a great deal of looking into. Blacks were held 2 to 3 times as long from the time of arrest until the time they were released on bond. Pretrial diversion was 26% for whites, 7% for the percentage of blacks. All these numbers are corrected to make them proportional to race. So blacks were about 1/3 of what you'd expect them to be in pretrial diversion. The sentencing was not that disproportionately, and it varied from year to year that we were studying. So that's a brief summary of what was a 50-page report that we did 25 years ago. But it remains the only really in-depth study of these sorts of things. 5 years ago, in 2018, I had, from time to time, done what I called guys' dumb studies. And guys' dumb studies, what I would call the sheriff and say, hey, would you do me a favor and send me over your population reports? And that's all I would have, would be the jail population reports. But we looked at those and compared them to what we had seen before. And what we found was that there were still major disparities along the same level as we had seen before, 3 to 4 times the number of blacks in the jail 5 years ago. So, and now you can bring up that study I recently showed and put that on screen if you would,
Okay.
President Crossley, Councilor Crossley. So just this year, the NAACP was curious how we were doing, and the Racial Justice Task Force, and let's see, can we make that a little? Yeah, thank you. Maybe one more notch. Thank you. So I asked Sheriff Marte, who has been very easy to deal with on these sorts of things, for the most recent numbers in the Monroe County Jail. And that was just January to March. And I was thinking today I'll send him another request and get for the first 6 months. So this is a very small database, and I don't want to put too much emphasis on that database. But on the average, blacks were 26.5% of the inmates in the Monroe County Jail, 4% of Monroe County population, almost 7 times as much as we would expect if things were proportionate. And this is a worse number than we had ever seen. This is it's, as I've been saying, this is not new. For years, we've seen a almost 400% disparity in 4-time disparity in our incarceration, and it was actually much higher in this 3-month period than we had seen before. It's very interesting. The jail population, ever since COVID, has been down, and it has not leaped back up. But even though there were fewer people in jail, it did not help black disproportionality. In fact, black disproportionality seems to have grown with that period. I can't tell you why this happens, but we do know from countless studies that the inferior healthcare, poverty, inferior schools, and bias at every step of the criminal justice system contribute to these disproportionate outcomes. When I first joined the NAACP, and just because not everybody can see me, I'm white, I believed that Monroe County was a place of equity and fairness and an oasis of racial justice. And I soon found out, certainly when I did these things, it's a myth. It's a myth that especially white people are very fond of. In my experiences, most black people know that's a myth perpetuated by white people, so we don't have to address some of these very serious problems that we've got. When we did the intermediate study 5 years ago, what we said is we need to have the criminal justice system create these statistics. It really shouldn't be the job of the NAACP and a bunch of Unitarians to go out and spend hours and hours and hours begging for data to go through it. But that's what has to happen. We made a presentation to the Indiana Supreme Court asking them to take steps, because there is a system that has all of this data available, but we had to pay to get data out of the system and in 2018, and it's free to the county, but we had to pay for it. And we're still saying the time has come for the criminal justice system and the counties and the courts to take responsibility to make sure they find this data and make it available to the public in an easily accessible fashion. And I'm very glad to say that Erica Oliphant, our prosecutor, has worked closely with the NAACP and obtained a grant from Arnold Ventures, which is right now sponsoring a study which is being done as we speak. And that is led by Eric Grauman of IUPUI and Professor Tree Henry, two professors who are very good to work with, and I can hardly wait to see what they're coming up with, but we just have to wait. That's not ready yet. I love your agenda item. What investments can the county council make to promote equality in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender within the justice system? Gender, women are vastly underrepresented in the jail. That's not as vast as it once was, but that's not what we're looking at. If there's anything that I believe, and I'm with the NAACP, but this is me, okay? It's that comprehensive solutions cannot expect those needing rehabilitation to pay for their rehabilitation. In the first place, if there's anything we know about the people in the criminal justice system, they're poor. If they weren't poor, they wouldn't need to shoplift, and they could get treatment for alcoholism and get treatment for mental health. To ask poor people to come up with the money to pay for their rehabilitation is going to fail. But we make people pay to go through pretrial diversion. We make people pay to go through drug treatment. We make people pay if they're on home detention to keep them out of the jail. They got to pay a high cost every day. If Monroe County wants to be a real leader in the state of Indiana, and to the best of my knowledge in the nation, what we'll do is we'll fund the criminal justice system fully, so we don't need to depend on defendants to pay for their own rehabilitation, because that's never going to work. The system, and let me say, one of the things that I believe, I can't look at this table, the 10 or dozen people around this table, and say, you all have caused this problem. You've inherited this problem. It's not of your making. In fact, it's been making for 200, 400 years. But what you are responsible for is solving it. You didn't make it, but you are responsible to solve it. And we're never going to come up with a perfect solution, but we've got to come up with meaningful things to try. And because there's all the intersection of race and poverty is so strong, and between race and poor health care and poverty, and poor schools and poverty, because all of these things are so strong, what it ends up happening is a system, even the parts of it that aren't themselves biased against black people, end up with the system being disproportionately black people who are in the jails and in the criminal justice system. And we need to, if we're going to address equity and race and ethnicity in the criminal justice system, we need to say, we're going to do it by solving overall problems in the criminal justice system as much as we are by just trying to directly address race. So I don't know how I'm doing on time, but
You're good.
That's sort of summary of what I would like to bring to this attention of the group. And I'm so pleased this group is here and active and includes so many people. I will say that Ruth Eit, who's out here in the audience and a steady representative, look up Ruth's Wave at us, is my primary collaborator on much of this stuff for the last 5 years, and extremely knowledgeable too. And if you ever have any questions about any of the numbers, she's the data master.
Awesome. Thank you. And I have this up because this is also in the report too. So this was your findings from January of this year up until March 31st of this year. And this was provided by our sheriff's office. And
I did the division
Yeah.
here, but the data, which I think might be
Got
the
it.
next,
Okay.
was provided by the sheriff.
Okay, which is this here. Aha, here we go.
Yeah, that's what the sheriff provided.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And I will stop sharing my screen here. And I think we'll open it up for discussion on Guy Laufman's presentation. And I do see Commissioner Thomas is on Zoom and she has her hand up. So Commissioner Thomas, you have a question?
Thank you so much for getting to me. I appreciate it. I want to thank the NAACP and Mr. Laufman and the UU Church, all the folks who contributed to this study. What I think is really important is that the Ray and Beck study that we have does an in-depth dive into gender and age, but ignores all of the other demographic areas that are so important to understand. So thank you for bringing this. I know you sent it to us on email a while back. I thank you then, but it's really important to have this information and to incorporate it into how we plan for the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. I just want to open it up to other committee members. Councilmember Anderson.
So when we were putting this body together, we had a pretty short window of topics to discuss. There's a lot to discuss when it comes to justice issues. And one of the things that the NAACP did was they made sure we got the report that Councilmember Crossley sent. I really appreciate your presentation. There is a certain aspect that we did inherit this problem, but over the past 5 years, the rate of racial disparity in our jail has doubled. That is not an inherited problem. The system is broken. It is really important that we talk about this tonight because that rate of growth is simply unacceptable. Now, we know that both the probation department and the prosecutor's department, the board of judges and other folks, they also understand this. In the probation department, they're working with the Reducing Revocations Challenge. The JDAI program is very invested in sussing out racial disparities. And as you mentioned, Eric Grauman's studies in the prosecutor's department is available to anybody that has an internet connection that can go to scholar.google.com and look up Eric Grauman. He's published all of his studies so that they're available to anybody. I really agree strongly that although the NAACP has done an amazing job of collating this data, the #1 recommendation from Ken Ray was we need a data source in the county. He could not find data when he came here. He had a really hard time finding data when he was here. It is time for us to stop relying on outside entities to do this work. It's time for us to do this work.
Thank you. I'll ask a question. I know that you have mentioned that the Arnold Ventures project is still ongoing. Do you know when that is supposed to be completed? Because I'd love to find or read all the findings in that.
Well, this, where one of the parts of it is community meetings, and so we get the feedback, and we have one of those. Ruth, do you happen to know the end date? I tell you what, we were funded for a year, and the funding started several months ago, and we're supposed to have everything done within a year. So I would say by this time next year, and hopefully before that, we should have the results of that.
Okay. And to my knowledge, because I know a little bit about it, how isn't this something that is supposed to be paired with another county in
Yes,
Indiana?
yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how that is? Because I don't think everybody knows about this. So can
Sure.
you just give a brief overview of what this is supposed to do and how?
Right. Well, when we were early stages of considering participating in this Arnold Ventures project, somebody pointed out we're not exactly a representative county of in terms of racial diversity. Now, we're very representative for most of the state of Indiana, but it was seen as desirable to find another county that would participate with a broader diversity. And it turned out Lake County was very interested. So Lake County, which is Gary, and other communities that are much higher proportion of Black people, has participated equally in this, and the studies that are being done for our racial justice system are also being done for their racial justice system to see where there are differences and where there are similarities.
Okay. Thank you.
Beverly, do you know anything more than me about the dates for the?
I don't.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
I have one, just, it's a comment, not a question, but first of all, Guy, thank you for all your dedication, and for Ruth and everybody that's been involved with this for decades. One of the things I've heard from the local chief of police is that we're seeing more people being arrested who are not from Monroe County. And so I think it would be behoove us to also look at residents of the people that are being arrested here. Partly because that was one part of the fear in I-69 coming through, that there would be more crime coming to us. And we're hearing a little bit about that also from the sheriff, in that the people who are in the jail are there on more serious crimes. Mm-hmm. So I would like to expand what you're doing by asking for that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Christy?
So thank you first for coming. I always struggle with I swear. Thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you. I just want to say that even after folks, I work in reentry, so I work for New Leaf, New Life, and reentry-based services. So when folks come out of our county jails and our prison system, and I promise you, the disparity is there for Black or brown people after reentry too. They are less likely to be able to access treatment, less likely to obtain employment. Like, you know, they have a disadvantage compared to me. And it's really something that definitely needs to be addressed in our community for sure.
Thank you for pointing that out. All right. Go ahead, Mayor Hamilton.
I don't think I have a question either, though. A comment. I guess one question. Your older study emphasized the way the system itself, once in the system, seemed to generate a lot of racial disparity.
Correct.
Didn't necessarily see it going in, could have happened, but you saw a lot. We don't know that for this. We don't have that data for this at this point, right?
We don't have any. That was, you know, that took a lot of people
right.
walking down to the prosecutor's office every Saturday morning and going through those files one at a time. That's the system, the statewide system. That data is in there.
Yeah.
But I can't get to it.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for all the work you've done, I know, through the years. I think, to me, you know, this committee is as I understand it, supposed to recommend fiscal, financial responses, and I totally agree, the more data we can get, the better, and we ought to be generating it ourselves, and it will take some time. There's some in it, but I think we have plenty of data to know that we have enormous challenges, and I continue to believe that as we invest in the criminal justice system directly, which needs to happen, that we should very intentionally, as a community, invest in equally, at least, in things that keep people out of the criminal justice system, help them deal after the criminal justice system. And I don't think there's any doubt that we need that to help address this, and that money, it's complicated for sure too, and we don't know exactly what to do. Guy, you suggested certain things within the system to reduce payment requirements and stuff, and all of it takes money, I think, and with partners. So I just continue to think that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiscal?
Yes, so I also appreciate what Guy and Ruth and others in the NAACP have done. The study in 2003 was the first one? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an awful lot of work, and it's helpful to have some of those follow-ups, and of course, to have a comprehensive follow-up is limited by what Councilor Iverson said, is we just don't have the data. So I guess I have two follow-up questions. First of all, are there things that we can do aside from waiting to get the data? Like, can we examine our processes without focusing on the data, but examine our processes and make sure there aren't implicit biases that go along with, things that law enforcement, prosecutor's office, judges do in their day-to-day activities. And then secondly, focusing on the data, who's going to get the data? I mean, what can we do as a group of concerned community leaders to get closer to obtaining that data?
Well, if I might treat that as a question, when we were doing the research, I came to understand the data we had to pay for is free to the county. Now, who in the county has the right to that, I don't know. But what we did was we sent off a request for certain specific kinds of data that we were interested in. If the county comes up with a plan about what you want to know, I think, hopefully the judges, and I'm confident the prosecutor would use their special access. I would hope that they could use their special access to get the data. Now, it's one thing to get 100 pages of stuff, and it's another thing to analyze it. And Ruth Eit is a master data analyst, but it's going to take somebody who's working at it for the county who understands the data we're asking for and then can process it. But the county could address this if you get the data and get an analyst. And once we got permission to get the data and send off the request, it came back in, I don't know, a month. And then we had to run, figure out how to process it. But that was Ruth and me working, as volunteers. And if you all have paid staff person whose job it is to get this data and analyze this data, you shouldn't have to wait, because the data's there and the county is the criminal justice system is entitled to it, and I would think they would share it with the county, and I would hope the public. It's called the Odyssey system, the Odyssey court management system, and it's a statewide program, statewide system.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow, thank you, Mr. Luffman. And I just wanted to follow up. You were talking about the Honorable Benches project that's currently being worked through. And I know there was actually a previous one in the prosecutor's office as well. I think it's completed, but I wasn't sure if that data has been released. In fact, a summary of that was presented, or at least beginnings of it was presented, I believe, to County Council and I apologize, I don't recall the month, letting them know that that report was going to, at that stage, was going to be forthcoming. I would have to go back and look for those dates for you, but I know it gets to some of the data points that you're talking about, because I do remember Professor Groman and his and the team being in there, and they did interviews with some of us in the prosecutor's office and others. They were in there looking at files, going through the actual paper copies and working through them. And so some of that comprehensive data, I'm wondering if it answers some of the questions that so I just wanted to let you know about that. And I can follow up to see if that first study is complete and public yet.
I was aware of that as it was going on and went to several meetings. Ruth, do you have data on information on the availability of that study?
I don't have it, but there was a precursor is available. There is one part that was completed, and then they submitted based on their findings their proposal to earn ventures, and this is a follow-up.
So that might have been hard to pick up, but a phase 1 was completed. That's public, and phase 2 has sort of melded into the Arnold Ventures project, as Ruth has explained it. Ruth Eit has explained it. It's AYDT.
Okay. Thank you.
We do this differently. I just looked it up. It was presented to county council. It looks like literally a year ago. The activities that were reported on at that point had started in April of 2021 and went through June of 2021. And there was a memo that we can put on our website so folks can look at it, but it's part of the county council packet. I'm sorry, I'm not finding the date of the meeting that it's on the packet for, but yeah, it's a memo from Eric Grauman to the Monroe County prosecutor and summarizing all of the activities to date and some of the findings. And I remember, it's been a year, but I do remember that that they've done a lot of getting, meetings, gathering information from folks and visiting and observing to look at policy, practice, collecting data as sort of part of that precursor to the main project. So they were already collecting a lot of good data through COVID. And that was kind of part of the caveat, I think, that they were expressing. But we'll get this out there just so everybody can see what we've been privy to.
Thank you. Councilmember Iverson.
So, Mr. Laughlin, I want to take this in a little bit of a different direction. We've been meeting for quite a number of weeks now, and if my memory is correct, I don't think there's been a week that's gone by where we haven't discussed fees. You briefly mentioned some of your findings on fees. Could you maybe extrapolate a little bit more about what the reports have found about those fees? And I'm going to put you on the spot there.
Well, one of our concerns has certainly been pretrial diversion fees. And I looked on their website today, and there are still fees. You can apply to have the fees waived, but you can't start the program till that's been granted. It doesn't say what the standards for waiver of the fees are. And it's not what I would call inviting to get your fees waived. And again, if that fee at the time was $375, maybe it's less. That would be a pleasant surprise. But then you have to pay for your treatment if you need alcohol or drug treatment. And if you need psychological counseling, you have to pay for that. And we know those are sometimes on a sliding fee. But so participation in the pretrial diversion program can cost hundreds to thousands of dollars, usually by people who don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in their hundreds to thousands, and therefore they flunk out of the program. And I've never been able to find data on how many flunk out. If you've got to pay if you're released on with an ankle bracelet. If you get home detention, you've got to pay for those services, and that used to be like $100 a day for people who don't have the money. There used to be a probation. Let me say, I was a lawyer for 40 years, but I've not been a lawyer for almost 10. So my data is obsolete, but for somebody who doesn't have any money and isn't particularly good at managing money, which often goes with these situations, and maybe isn't very good at keeping their calendar, and of course, sometimes you had to pay to get out of jail. That's it. You got to wait till they let you out of jail. So all of those fees are pertinent. But the probation fees to be successfully on probation and the pretrial diversion fees are particularly obvious.
Thank you. I think we've heard from other folks some similar data points. So thank you for bringing that.
Okay, thank you. And then I know we here in the county, I talked about this a little bit last week, about how the Center for Collaborative Designs, or I think I got that right. I always mess this up. But county just approved the funding for it. Commissioners just approved the contract for it. And so as we are talking about, surveys and data and things like that, I did want to extend an invitation to either Commissioner Thomas or Commissioner Githens to maybe touch briefly. I'm not sure if Commissioner Thomas would be able to unmute and talk a little bit about this and have you all tag team it, but just to kind of give a brief overview for the public, for us to get a fully understand of what this is supposed to be for and about, and how we could possibly use that data as we are going through all of this.
Sure. Actually, I'll defer to Commissioner Githens since she's present and see if there's anything else I can add at the end. How about that?
Well, as I told Councilor Crosley before the meeting started, my memory is a little bit dampened on this because it's been a couple of years really since we started this process. But it's to interview different people that have had contact with our criminal justice system at different points. Sometimes the initial conversation will occur while they're in our facility, and we'll follow them as they leave. It's to talk to different family members. And I really don't know exactly what all they're going to be touching on with things, but it revolve around the way the processes are in our criminal justice system. But also, it's my hope that it'll give us a path to making things better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's what I would add, and I think that's excellent overview of the survey. The point is to talk, I know, about services and service needs and needs for transition as well out of incarceration. But this is really going to be what we see as a first step toward developing a really good dashboard of data that we hope will be publicly facing and available widely for anyone who's interested in seeing where things are data-wise, demographically, with the jail population at any given time. So that's our hope, but we need this good background study to help us develop the right programs and to understand the shortcomings. We could probably think what they are, but to really understand the shortcomings and the best way to help people ease out of the criminal justice system and not go back to it.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, Ms. Wilson?
Thank you. I just wanted to share two things. One regarding fees. When we talk about fees, I know they fall into different buckets, right? We talk about fees post-conviction, fees that are PDP, fees that are pretrial release, and then home detention. So, and not addressing all of them, there is one statute, though, I wanted to share with the county council. Specifically, it's Indiana Code 333741. And that statute is, I think, helpful, at least in terms of talking about some of the fees. Well, sorry, let me get the right one. When we talk about when there's criminal convictions. And the second thing that I wanted to share, and I'll double check that statute and make sure I email it to you if I have the correct one. But there are certain fees, is my point, in statute that when there's a felony or a misdemeanor conviction that is included. And then the other piece is why we're talking about the forward-facing dashboard and this hope of getting those data points. I was wondering if I could get a sense of which specific data points are we hoping as a community and as a committee to be able to work towards. And I think that might help all of us understand how we can achieve that. Are we looking at conviction numbers? Are we looking at length of period of time in jail? I just was hoping for a little bit of guidance of what we're all hoping for.
Yeah. And I think that's a really, actually, I know we have room here and a little bit in our agenda to talk about DEI and things like that. So that is a discussion that we could, have as we are talking through that here this evening. I think we have one more brief presentation here shortly. But does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Loffman? No? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, and you might not have collected this, is there any demographic information? You were talking about a lot of folks that aren't able to pay for things. Do you have demographic information like the socioeconomic status of folks that are incarcerated or trying to go through pretrial diversion or anything like that in any of the studies that you've done?
There's not any socioeconomic status maintained in the criminal justice system except who gets the public defender. My understanding is that the bottom line is almost everybody who asks for the public defender gets the public defender. And my perception of that is that they're mostly pretty poor. They might be terribly, terribly poor, but they're not people who can afford to pay thousands of dollars to an attorney if they're charged with a felony, many thousands of dollars. And so my conclusion is, but I don't have adequate data to back it up, almost everybody who runs through the system is poor, with the exception of some OWI, some drunk driving, which cuts much more across the board than the economic status lines than your property crimes and your status crimes and your violent crimes.
And I see, I don't know if Ms. Renbeck is joining us virtually here, and she turned on her camera and in the conversation of public defender and fees. I wasn't sure if you wanted to chime in on that.
Sure. Sorry, my Wi-Fi's been in and out, so I have video on and off constantly. I don't have, I've looked at this before just because I'm curious in terms of data and how often my office is appointed. I don't have current numbers. I think the last numbers I have are from 2020, but I would certainly be happy to try to put something together and submit it to everyone.
That's awesome. Thank you.
No, please.
I just wanted to add one thing, one significant change in the last 10 years, kind of since you were talking about that, really has been the Medicaid expansion. And as you said, really the vast majority of individuals that we work with are income eligible for Indiana Medicaid or one of the Healthy Indiana plans. And so that has vastly changed what people have to pay for treatment. So the vast majority of people have no copay at all when it comes to treatment.
I love good news.
So, yeah,
Thank you.
exactly. So like you said, OWIs or people with commercial insurance, maybe if it's not income, I mean, that's not to say that that's everybody, but the vast majority of individuals who come in for treatment don't have any kind of copay. Indiana Medicaid has nominal copays per month, $10 to $13, and most of the time, you know, we're able to cover that. So in terms of treatment expenses, I think you would see a very big difference from before.
Yeah, and then can I correct my statute? It's actually Indiana Code 333741. And that's those fees for felony and misdemeanor convictions, if you want to take an opportunity to look at it. And then the last piece was, I know as we're talking about access is incredibly important, especially when we talk about transportation, whether or not someone has the ability to pay for a bus ticket, to be able to pay for treatment. And I think those are absolutely things that I'm so thankful that we're talking about. I just wanted to also express that anyone in any socioeconomic space can commit a crime, though, as we're talking about it, that any person can commit a crime. And I just wanted to include that as we're talking about it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Thank you.
I see Misty had her hand up, and then the Councilmember Iverson. Okay.
I just have a quick comment. As far as like the Medicaid, we are in like redeterminate, like the expansion of Medicaid, just so you guys are aware, that is slowly closing. So folks who, was actually like a part of this, to where I went to treatment during the height of COVID. Right after I went to treatment, I was eligible for Indiana Medicaid. And then during COVID, they were like, you know what, we don't care what you make. So like everything's stopped, redeterminations have been stopped. So then I obtained Medicaid throughout my treatment process, one-on-one therapy and all of that. But recently, I think it was March of this year, they started to open up redeterminations for Medicaid. So if folks who were eligible for Medicaid have like stabilized, gainful employment during those redeterminations, we are up for cancellations. That actually just happened to me. So, just to be aware that we might be in a lot bigger crisis than what we're aware of, with our community members having and maintaining insurance, having one-on-one therapies with people, and then all of a sudden not be eligible for those services, and just kind of like not phased out, just, I'm sorry, like you don't have it anymore because you don't qualify, and our pandemic is over, our statewide emergency is over. People are losing their Medicaid. I mean, I get it all day at work, people coming in saying, I make enough money to not qualify for Medicaid, but I don't make enough money to pay $300 for marketplace insurance a month. So just like during that time, I have been referring people to Health Net, which is a great organization here in our community. But aside from that, like that part of Indiana Medicaid super scares me. Yes, it stabilizes during the pandemic, but now we're saying we're doing redeterminations, and it is based on your income eligibility.
And that started April 30th.
Thank you. I was just like, it really affected a lot of people, especially like people who are like me, who maybe initially started out working 1 or 2 days a week at Wendy's, and then given this insurance, and then to where I had the insurance during the pandemic, to all of a sudden like, oh, you've stabilized and made some change in your life, just enough change that we're gonna make sure you can't go to the doctor anymore. I mean, thank goodness that my health is in pretty good shape, and we do have organizations like Health Net.
And then I just want to, I know, April, you had mentioned the Indiana Code and the statute regarding the fees. Can you repeat that one more time? I think I got it.
It's Indiana Code 333741.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, Councilmember
And
Iverson.
just so that everyone knows, before you look that up, or you can look it up, this is the section of code that says that the clerk shall collect from a defendant. There is very little wiggle room here for us to, the language is pretty clear there. And I think that's part of the point that you were making, correct?
Well, I did want to acknowledge that there are different buckets of fees. So I think this statute, and reading the first part for everyone for everyone else's reference, Section A says for each action that results in a felony conviction under a statute or a misdemeanor conviction under a statute, the clerk shall collect from the defendant a criminal costs fee of $120, and then there's additional fees listed. So when we're having these more nuanced conversation about fees, which I'm sure is where we're getting to, I just wanted to make sure we had that knowledge in our conversation as we're trying to understand moving forward.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Wiltz.
And I'm not sure if there's someone who can really address this, but it's my understanding, though, that if you do pretrial diversion, that fee structure doesn't necessarily have to apply, but then you can impose pretrial diversion fees, but don't have to. Like the language changes from shall under the normal course of things to may once there's the pretrial diversion agreement. Is that sounding plausible?
You're correct in that PDP fees are a separate statute. I don't know that statute, so I don't want to speak about it, but I can look it up. I will go back to there is a waiver though for the prosecutor's office where someone can ask to have a waiver of PDP fees. So that is an option.
Okay.
But I'm happy to look that up for you.
Okay. I see Commissioner Thomas has her hand up. If you want to go ahead and make your question or comment.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, my video is not working right now. I'm wondering if the council wants to talk to the prosecutor and the judges, community corrections, probation about these fees and whether there's a way to restructure them or, and because that impacts the funding for these programs. So is there another way to fund these programs? I think it's an interesting question because the concern is just on the face of it, that if you are collecting fees for pretrial diversion, that you're collecting fees for somebody who has not been found guilty in a court of law. And yes, it's a service and a program, but maybe that's how we need to look at it. So just throwing that out there for conversation. Thank you.
That's a good point. Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Well, it begs the question, how much money does the county take in these fees? And how,
Less and less each year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a point of discussion at budget time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do have ED lit funds, which of course have been tagged for criminal justice. So there's a new ongoing funding source that could be used potentially to cover those fees.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go to Karen. Go ahead, Karen.
Miss Wilson's cases aren't, she handles typically felonies, so I don't know how much pretrial diversion she's done lately. So I just wanted to jump in with a couple pretrial diversion facts. There is a waiver form in terms of asking for a fee waiver. My understanding is so it asks about your finances. My understanding is those are reviewed by our elected prosecutor, Miss Oliphant. If a waiver is granted, then in my experience, additional community service hours are added to the pretrial diversion agreement. I don't know the exact amount of pretrial diversion right now. I have a client recently who the charge was about $450, and I know it can be less than that as well. Wow. Just some data for you.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. Anybody have any other questions, comments? No? All right. Well, thank you so much, Guy, for your presentation and a healthy, robust discussion and a conversation related to your findings. So thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Next up, the Monroe County Women's Commission has been coming to our meetings, and I know I watched their meeting, and actually I think I was a part of it, where they had talked about findings of survey, because of course we know diversity, equity, and inclusion goes well beyond race, but we also have to look at all of these things from a gender standpoint and an able-bodied standpoint as well. And so the Women's Commission, I'm going to invite one, there are two of them, but one is going to come up and just kind of talk about they're going to give a brief talk of what it is that they think is missing and what it is that they could assist as well. So welcome. And if you don't mind introducing yourself to the people.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
You might have to jam the mic
Scooching
a little
in.
bit.
All right.
Thank
Hi.
you.
So thank you very much for inviting us up to the table here. My name is Julie Hardesty, and I'm a member of the Monroe County Women's Commission. We actually were working on a public comment that we were going to be making today, so I've kind of got that. And then I can also talk about the comments and the reports that we've been working on and providing previous to this. I'm a resident of Monroe County, and I am a county council appointed member of the Monroe County Women's Commission. And as we stated in our last public comment, the Women's Commission is intending to walk alongside the Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee, county officials, the sheriff, and the jail commander to ensure that issues that specifically affect women and marginalized genders are considered when discussing the local justice system. And one thing that we also wanted to make sure and clarify was the mention that we made last time about Kathleen Sobiek, another member of our Women's Commission, who is a trained facilitator for the for SIM mapping, the sequential intercept model mapping. She can help get things started with an application, but as a resident of Monroe County, I'm pretty sure she's not allowed to serve as the facilitator, but we just wanted to make sure that that was clarified before we move on. So we've been watching and commenting as we come along on the different intercept topics that have been presented on. And we started off actually trying to look at the data. It was actually the Ray and Beck report that's already been talked about today. We dug into that in terms of gender issues and to see what was being reported on for that, which is just for 2003 to 2018. So it is out of date data. But what we were seeing from that was a trend for one thing, the only definitions that we were able to find were male and female. There were no other definitions for inmates at all. So in terms of gender. So there's no mention of transgender inmates. There's no mention of anyone on the gender spectrum. So it's either male or female. And the other point that we were seeing that seemed important to us was that as time went on from 2003 to 2018, the percentage of inmates identified as female was increasing. So by 2018, 25% of the inmates in jail were female, or identified as female. So that is pretty significant. So it is out of date data, however, so we don't know at this point if that is still the case or if things have changed. So that is, as Mr. Loftman was talking about, would be really great to be able to see more current data, be able to compare current data to what we were seeing from that report, to see what kind of changes have occurred and what that means for anything that's new facilities or new services being provided. So that was essentially our initial report, was getting at that needing to try and have current information, current data about the female inmate population in the jail, and any sort of data that might be available at this point from the jail on non-binary, transgender, and multigender inmate populations, which I'm not even sure that data is being tracked. But if there is some way that data is being tracked, or if there's some way that it could be tracked, that's going to be helpful. And also, that was getting that information. If the Women's Commission could help in working with that data, doing some data analysis work on that, that's potentially something that that was something we were initially thinking we could help with. if that is desired. So, and we did see, for today, we were looking at, we were actually considering wanting to reiterate that a guiding point for us is part of the public comment we made, that Maria Douglas made last week on behalf of the Women's Commission, in quoting Tracy Johnson, who is one of the authors of the Philadelphia report that we mentioned last week, in looking at diversionary programs for women. That is that when women are caregivers and primary or sole wage earners for a family and encounter diversionary programming that requires time and money, that entire families can be entrapped in poverty, possibly for generations. So we're looking at what we're doing right now as a chance to stop that cycle here in Monroe County. I was also noticing on the reading list for today's topic that the book Transgender Behind Prison Walls by Sarah Jane Baker is on the reading list. And I think that would be a really fantastic source to dig into. I wasn't sure if transgender inmate issues were going to be part of the conversation today. I was kind of hoping they would be with it on the reading list, but we haven't really dug into that sort of topic yet. But one thing that was something that came up in considering what we would want to emphasize in needing to care for marginalized genders in the justice system is things like in-depth screening at intake, where you're going beyond male-female gender identity. You're looking at mental health, medical health, social, educational, and work history, assessing more deeply if LGBTQ+ is part of the identity for the inmate. So things along those lines that can get into what needs might be there for safety and security for the inmate, as well as for everyone that is involved in that intake. And then the points from the prior reports that we talked about last week for diversionary programming, allowing in-person and video calls when children are in the home, making sure that there is access that way, providing childcare and transportation when there are programming needs, and then making sure records are expunged in a timely manner, because otherwise diversion itself is kind of pointless, and ensuring that programs are gender and trauma responsive, so taking that into consideration. So we're also looking at how non-gender specific individuals are treated in the jail. So there's not much information that we have right now for that. So again, if there's any data that is available, we've been having conversations, I should mention this, we've been having conversations with Sheriff Marte to see if we can meet with him as the Women's Commission and get at some of this. I don't quite know, we don't have that scheduled yet, but we're hoping that that is something that will be happening. So there might be another avenue that we're able to try and come up with something that's more recent data, or see what other data is available. And then the last thing I think I want to point out is looking at reproductive care options, what the situation is for prenatal, postnatal, menopausal, those situations when inmates are in those situations. Endometriosis is another issue that can happen. So those sorts of points are relevant for gender issues, for identifying women and those that are in the criminal justice system. So.
Okay, thank you. And I again wanted to. It's not something that we talk about a lot, and it's often missed a lot. I don't know. It's it's an oversight, but it's definitely something that we have to think about and know, because we have all walks of life that are here, and it is really important for us to know what we are working with, so that we can make sure that we are tracking this information and making sure that people are getting the care that we are needing. So I definitely appreciate the work that the Women's Commission is doing for that. Does anybody have any questions for Julie regarding that? I know a couple of people have to leave. Thank you for coming.
I don't have a question for Julie, but I do have a comment related to the SEM training. We also had a couple of employees that went through that SEM training with NAMI. So, one who is not a Monroe County resident. So that might be a possibility. The other thing is the folks from the Gain Center that did the training are kind of part of technical assistance for a SAMHSA grant that we have. And part of what we were going to do this year was for Monroe County do SEM. Now, their funding has been cut, so they don't have as much funds that are available at this point in time. But they did say, if you would like for us, so the people from the Gain Center to come in and do the training, they could probably do that. We'd probably have to reallocate some resources. So just thought I'd put that out on the table because I think that would be a great opportunity.
Thank you. April, and then I see Karen has her hand raised on Zoom.
I appreciate all the things that you were addressing, and I do have a question as part of this process. One of the things I heard near the end was talking about medical needs and us being able to be supportive of that at different stages. I was just wondering, as part of the county council's process and the commissioners of evaluating the new facility, jail facility, if there's also going to be a portion where we're evaluating the current medical care that's being provided versus what is needed for some of these different stages as different types of medical needs. So I was just wondering, and I know we've been doing them intercept points, but I just wanted to put that on the county council's radar, understanding what medical providers are available, as well as understanding how often they're available. Someone who's available twice a week is helpful. Sometimes you need services, though, more often. We have had people who've been in the jail who I know have needed all types of services. And so I would just put that on the list of things that I'm hoping will get evaluated to address some of these needs. And the last piece for jail design is our current, we went to some facilities, I know the county council is part of the CGRC, where we looked at intake that had multiple different rooms, which would allow for when people are being booked in to have space at for different reasons, right? Which would be supportive of safety issues when you're trying to make sure there's multiple options available for people who are in maybe transgender, to make sure they have that safe space. So I just wanted to include that as something I hope we're looking at.
No, those are very good, valid points, and I agree with that. In terms of treatment, before we go to Karen, I believe in one of our upcoming meetings, Councilmember Iverson can talk about the treatment and assessing, I think.
Yes. So our next meeting, sorry, that was a little loud, will be Monday, August the 28th, and that entire meeting is going to be devoted to treatment. Now, we originally had thought like this is going to be an SUD treatment session or a mental health treatment session. But I think what we heard from the Board of Judges today, and also from some of the presentations, is that treatment is not unilateral. It's many, many things. So make sure to come on August 28th. Councilmember Wiltz will be leading that one. And then the next meeting after that, I don't have the calendar pulled up, so I apologize, is going to be all about jail construction. And right now, right now, what we're thinking about is the programming in the new jail. And if you watched any of the council meetings or the commissioners meetings, the architect has said it's time to start thinking about programming. Like, what are we going to do in the jail? How are we going to do things in the jail? And part of that is, what does intake look like? Who are the populations coming through intake, and what does that look like? And I think conversations like these are going to help expand our scope of those conversations by saying we need to be non-binary in our thinking. Mm-hmm. So this is very helpful.
Well, and beyond just programming, but the actual facilities and what the processes are in terms of actually addressing that need too. I mean, I think that's huge.
So stay tuned. And you'll notice there's a big chunk of space between today and the next time. So hopefully some big decisions can be made in that time.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
Karen, you can go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to share a couple things related to what Julie was mentioning. So one is that Mr. Lockman mentioned Odyssey. That's also like commonly known as My Case. That's the website that you can access like sort of the data system on that the court uses. my office's system also hooks into that, and it is a serious limitation in that my case in Odyssey is a binary choice in terms of gender. You can only choose male or female. There's no text field to enter. There's no opportunity on there to select like a transgender option. There's not even a place to put someone's pronouns. So in terms of fixing that or trying to maybe collect that sort of information, I think that's something we probably would have to start lobbying the Indiana Supreme Court to make some updates to Odyssey. I'm not as familiar, and I don't have it with me with the jail system. I don't know if that is data that the jail is able to collect because they use a different computer program. And then one other quick thing about what Julie mentioned, she mentioned expungement. A sort of good news, more recent development is that since July of last year, dismissed cases in Indiana now get expunged automatically. So it's not something that a defendant has to request anymore. It's free, it's automatic. It usually takes a couple months for the court to just process everything. That is something that has definitely changed really for the better, for at least for my clients. So.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right. Any other questions for Julie? No? All right. Again, thank you for the work that you all are doing and continuing to make sure that we are being equitable with our efforts. And so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Crossley, for inviting us up here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I wanted to kick it back. I know we're nearing the end of our meeting. But I know April, I wanted to go back to a point that April had, since we're going to open up. I know we've had a lot of discussion and conversation already with both of our presenters, but it sounds like we keep talking about dashboards and information that we do have, information that is outdated, or information rather that we are lacking and we need as we are going through with this process. So I want to kind of go back to your point, April, and I guess open up the discussion of what do we think is important for data? Like what kind of data do we think we need to have in order for us to move forward as a county? So I don't know who wanted to start it off. I don't know if April, since you have mentioned it, or anybody rather who wanted. So yeah, just want to open up the discussion there.
I guess my question is, from the data that we're collecting, what is the purpose or the goal that we're hoping to achieve? And maybe that'll help us narrow down what specific data points we need to prioritize.
I think that's a really important question to ask, and it's the thing that I've been thinking about, and I'd like to hear from my colleagues too, what could we be doing differently or better with more or better information? Because the main thing I hear and believe is that it's transparency. We want people to be able to see the information so that they can do with what they want or need to do. And so there's a public service in that. And I think that's valid enough as it is. But to your point, this is an opportunity for us to coordinate that goal with decision-making needs that we all have. So, yes.
No, I appreciate that. And I guess one follow-up is, for example, one of our goals has been to address recidivism, right? Mm-hmm. And to try to understand what is it that someone needs to help them to be as supportive as possible, and trying to target that, right? Or some of the programmings, one of the questions keeps asking, what can we fund, the county council fund, in order to be supportive of people so that they are diverted from the system and it's as long-term? Well, to answer that question, we have to understand what is causing people to be in the jail. And so what's really difficult, and I know that this is the decision that you guys are faced with, is there's limited resources and you're trying to narrow down which things can have the biggest impact immediately to be able to divert people. But I do think we have to understand why people are in the jail. And one question that has come up before is when we talk about, well, someone is in the jail and they have a level 6 felony. Well, I think we need to understand why someone's in the jail. Someone might be in the jail because they've been released 3 or 4 times, and that hasn't worked out. Someone might be in the jail because they have 4 or 5 different cases. Someone might be in the jail because we're waiting to try to get them into a treatment program, and the waiting list is really long, and we just keep coming back every rotation to try to be able to get them connected to services. It might be there are things that we can do to be more efficient in the courtroom to be able to communicate better so that people are not in jail as long. And getting to the nuances of those, I think, is a lot of different data points. And so it's not just keeping track of does person A have, how many cases does this person have? Person 1 have 5 cases? Do they have 4 cases? It's not just how long they've been in the jail, because if it's a level 1 felony or we're talking attempted murder or murder, that's different than how long has someone been in the jail for a misdemeanor. And misdemeanors, and they're all different cases, right? When we talk about violent offenses or someone has multiple OWIs, and we're worried that something might happen to where they go out and harm someone, even if they don't intend it. If they're drinking, they might kill someone in the community. Those variances are some of the fleshing out of data points that I hope that we include so that we can try to narrow down the most impact that we can all have as a community.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I know I'm just speaking for myself here as a council member who is responsible for that, of funding for all of that. I definitely agree with what you're saying in terms of collecting data and what are we going to do with it, because I'm not of the mindset of collecting data for it to sit on the shelf for another 2 or 3 years, only for it to be outdated, only for us to be circling back into this whole ordeal again. So I think it's really important for us to collect the data that we need so that we can get to the root of the problems and the issues, but we also and really truly see what we believe is what is actually happening. So in terms of, one of the things as to why people are in there, there's various reasons. I think we heard 2 of them earlier: failure to appear in courts and violation of probation. Where that all aligns up and what is really truly the cause of why people keep going into our justice system in the first place. But I do think with this data, we really have to treat it with sensitive hands and try to make sure, while we are holding it close to us, but making sure that it is open, honest, and transparent to the public. Because let's face it, we probably will have things in there that we might get called out for, and it's gonna hurt, and it will be, eye-opening for us. But in order for us to move forward to help reduce the recidivism, to figure out why we have people are going in there in the first place, it is so important for us to figure out all of this together so we can move forward with that. So yes, to your point, I do hope that we can collect this data and not just sit on it and do nothing for a couple of years, but just really do something with it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so depending on where, we're talking about collecting the data and what we want to do with it, but the we is going to probably change. We could be county commission, we could be the city, we could be, a lot of different people. NAACP, it could be a lot of different people. And so the data that needs to be collected might be different, and some of it might sit for a couple of years. It might sit until people are ready to analyze it and use it. And so I would be on the side of collecting more data than less, even if it had to sit for a minute until we got around to looking at it. But the open and transparent, I agree with that. But I just think that, where one, you may be looking at recidivism, somebody else is looking at the racial aspect, somebody else is looking at, services to people with disabilities. It's going to be so much that you need. So
many different moving parts. Yeah, I get it.
And I would answer this that we should keep it simple, right? We should make sure that everything is easily accessible and that we're starting at a top tier of data collection so that we can ask the question why off of that data and collect more. I think part of what happened with the Ray study. I'm going to read from the Ray study just real quick here. But what that team wrote is there's a distinct lack of easily accessible data to consistently measure and evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of court and jail operations and practices. For existing data, there's no centralized database or data repository containing salient data from the courts, law enforcement, jail, prosecution, defense, and community correction agencies to fully and accurately evaluate system practices and outcomes. For all you reading at home, that's on page 13 of the Ray study. So researchers, they simply need to get access to the data. And I think we have at least like that top level data, right? That I think we could put in database. And so what I'm thinking there is race, gender, ethnicity, and we could even separate that out by the different judicial intercepts in the SIM model. We could even say like, what was the gender count in the jail system on these dates? Can we look at the historic gender count on all these? Can we look at the historic gender count in community corrections? Can we look at, and kind of divvy it out that way, continuing to use the SIM intercept model? That's one method that we could do. But I don't think we should overcomplicate this. I think we should make it as easy to use as possible for people who can do the analysis. Or you know, we can do the analysis, the question of who is going to do the analysis. But I think that's paramount. I think we've all been to databases that are really hard to use. They're really hard to navigate. And we need to start walking. We don't need to start running. I do think we need a lot of data. But I also think that it just needs to be very easy to access and very easy to use. That would be my dream.
Well, I think also once the systems are in place and the procedures are in place to gather the data, it wouldn't be as difficult to update it. So if there is a part of the study that we can't do everything at once, I recognize that. But if there is part that sits on a shelf, it could be renewed because we would be, constantly collecting it and updating it, hopefully.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was just going to ask a similar question. Like, is there I guess, information that already exists that we would be whittling down for the dashboard, or is this like a new set of information that we'd be collecting? Because if there's already stuff that exists, that might make it a little bit easier. I don't know, maybe not.
That's the tricky thing, is that some departments have access to some data and some departments have access to other data.
And even if it's the same data, they aren't always collected in a way that's compatible for analysis, or so you can't group it. So it's like apples to oranges, even though it's all a fruit basket kind of thing. Yeah.
Good analogy.
Never mind.
I do want to get to a point that somebody made, Jordan McIntyre made on Zoom here as we are talking about data. And it reads, between 1980 through 2021, the number of incarcerated women increased by more than 525% nationally. I would love to see if the rates have increased for women in Monroe County, and if so, why? What are their charges? New Leaf, New Life would be interested in knowing these answers and creating diversion programming to get ahead of women being incarcerated. And another point also made by Jordan is knowing age, gender, race, economic status, charges, etc., can all help nonprofits plan and implement interventions and initiatives. So thank you for that point.
And I would add just zip code of origin as well, just to piggyback on something Commissioner Gibbons said earlier.
Yeah, that's a good point. Did you have, anybody else have any final comments?
Yeah, I want to make one additional final comment. We have not talked a lot about ethnicity tonight, and I think it's really we've heard in the past that individuals who are Hispanic, Latino or Latina individuals, as they interact with the justice system, experience difficulties, and there are some difficulties that are unique to certain populations there, and I think that that's been something that we've been missing here. That's on me as much as on anybody else, but I do think that in whatever future data we collect, we would want to collect information, but not only raw data, but also, anecdotal data. I think that's important too.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thank you. All right. Go ahead.
One just announcement. Yeah. Go ahead. Thanks. Tangentially related, I just wanted, before I forgot, to let people know that tomorrow at our, is it a work session? No, it's a regular session. What month is it? I don't know. Tomorrow at our regular session meeting for the county council, our GIS coordinator, John Baton, will be presenting to us something that he's been working on that is the beginning of a map of various services. So it layers city, county, and local community-based services of a variety of types. But I think that this map might be useful in our work. So I just wanted to, if you want to tune in and check it out, we've asked him to come to present, and I believe that'll be toward the beginning of our meeting, just for time management purposes.
And our meetings are always fun to watch. Fiscal policy.
And I do know that that same presentation was supposed to happen today. Unfortunately, the scheduling didn't work out for him, but he is also supposed to come to our August 28th meeting. So in addition to, just got word about that. So he is supposed to come to our August 28th meeting to present that. So if you don't get a chance to watch our fun meeting tomorrow, you can watch or be present for our August 28th meeting too. Okay. All right. So without further ado, we're again wrapping up. So we are here for public comment. So if there are any public comment that will be made, whether it's here or virtually, you do have 3 minutes. And so if you are virtual, we ask that you raise your hand. If you are here in person, we ask that you do sign in. And I'm gonna have the sign-in sheet over here next to, in between Ms. Beverly Calendar Anderson and Councilmember Iverson. So if you can just sign in as you are coming in person and just state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Ruth. I worked on some of the studies that Guy mentioned, and I have a few things that I want to follow up on that and some other thoughts. So I am not involved here in any of the service providing in the criminal justice system, anything else. So I don't have the firsthand knowledge that a lot of folks do. I do think that data can be very valuable. I also think that we can see it for years and years and years and years and not make any change. And I'm very concerned that that's a safe topic. Let's collect more data. Let's look for data. Let's see what we need to do. And it prevents forward movement. So I would challenge you to think about that. I want to challenge you to think about the location of the jail. Who's that going to impact? What neighborhood is that going to be in? I think that when you think about who to fund, are you funding agencies or employees who are respectful of everyone, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity? I think that sets a stage for a lot. I know it came up that potentially a lot of many of the folks who are being incarcerated currently are not local. And then I heard that as an implication that might skew our race data. That came up a couple years ago. The Odyssey data does include zip code of residence, and I looked at that for a period of time, and it didn't change the numbers substantially at all. Now that's been several years ago, so that may not be true anymore. I think April asked some really good questions about, why are we looking at the data? I would say personally, on the race issue, I kind of think of as people enter the system and go through, there are many decision points. And if you have a percentage of race distribution going into a decision point, and that skews at that decision point, then to me, if it's like fewer blacks are able to go to pretrial diversion proportionally, why? That's a point of inequity is being exacerbated, or maybe it's just continuing through. So I do think it's very valuable, but I just want to emphasize again, I think we've known for years this is an issue, and let's try and think creatively about, with the funding, how can we make sure we're not reinforcing things that we don't want to reinforce? And I think I've learned so much from people who've gone through it. We're like, whoa, how can we help people? How can we help them not do this? Let's just ask. And it sounds like, people are. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you. And it looks like we have a hand on Zoom from Carol Wilson. So please, if you are able to unmute, go ahead, and you have 3 minutes. Ms. Wilson, are you able to chat? Uh-oh, it looks like she's muted.
Oh, now unmute. There you go. We should be able to hear you.
Are you able to chat? Because we are not hearing you here in the Net U Hill room. Okay.
Is there anyone else there that you can talk to right now?
Yeah, let's see. If there's anybody else that's here in public that would like to make a comment, we're gonna hold off from Ms. Wilson just to see what's happening, so that she can go ahead and make her public comment later. But I just wanted to come back here in public to see if there's anybody else that wanted to make any public comment here. No. Okay. All right. Everybody's good here. Okay. I am going to go back to Lee, who is on Zoom. So if you can go ahead and unmute, you can go ahead, and you have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you for this very interesting and all the work that Guy Loftman and Bruce did. I think, it just brought home kind of some of the structural problems in the criminal justice system. And I just had one thing to add, which is I've been using Indiana State Police data, which is reported through to the in.gov website through the MPH programs. And this allows you to look at Monroe County specific data for arrests. Now, this isn't gonna follow cases. This is just about arrests. But one of the concerning things I've noticed is that there are more domestic violence charges, and those domestic violence charges and offenses have, looks like 31.4% are people of color in Monroe County, which I think that's a disturbing statistic. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you for that. All right. I'm going to go back. I don't know if TSD would be able to assist Ms. Wilson, but if you are able to unmute and you have 3 minutes, are you able to? Yeah, I'm not seeing it either. And I know TSD is trying to help her, but looks like. All right. All right. Is there a way that, Ms. Wilson, you would be able to type something in the chat here? Okay. All right, so last call for public comment. I'm gonna give that a little bit and see if she's able to chat in our chat so that we can read that publicly. But just last call for anybody here in public or virtual besides Ms. Wilson. Going once, going twice. All right. I am gonna see if we can come back to her and see if she is ready. But one last thing that we have is the approval of summary from our July 31st minutes, our summary of minutes. And so looking back at my committee members, if there's any changes or anything that needed to be made on those minutes.
I didn't see any changes.
Okay. All right. Seeing that there are no changes and just looking for a motion to approve the July 31st, 2023 meeting minutes.
So moved.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. And looks like we don't see anything here in the chat from Ms. Wilson. So with that further being said, I just thank everybody for the healthy conversation of our findings and discussions that we've had, and gives us a lot of food for thought as I usually take away from all of these meetings. But without further ado, this meeting is adjourned. Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Thank you.